Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the Morning Bible. Today I have snacks. I have ginger nuts and milk. I won't eat for the whole video, but I won't got snacks and realised I should record. But I still want to have at least one before I begin. 1 second. You can't beat it. You cannot beat biscuits and milk. Ginger nuts aren't the best one, but you can't beat biscuits and milk. Good morning. Welcome back. Today we are continuing as Jesus goes into Jerusalem, nearing the end of Luke chapter 19, which is quite exciting, because from 20 onwards is where it really picks up into sort of everything that happens to Jesus leading up to his death. Spoilers. But for today we have Jesus weeping over Jerusalem. So let's get into it. Let's have a quick read. From verse 41. And when he drew near and saw the city, Jesus wept over it, saying, "Would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. For the days will come upon you, when your enemies will set up a barricade around you, and surround you, and hem you in on every side, and tear you down to the ground, you and your children within you. And they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you did not know the time of your visitation." What? What on earth is Jesus saying? I feel like I say that sometimes. This is definitely one of those instances. I think the title that has been given to this little passage in my Bible helps, which is Jesus weeps over Jerusalem. So that tells us who Jesus is addressing here. He is addressing the city. He isn't necessarily addressing like one particular person, one particular group. He is addressing the city. Well, he is addressing obviously the people within it. It's what's the word? Is it mimetic? Mimetic, where, for example, when you're talking about the White House, you call it the White House. You don't mean the actual White House building. You mean the president and all of his staff, but you say the White House. And Jesus is kind of using that same sort of linguistic technique to talk about Jerusalem, but specifically talk about the people within it. And he talks about it in not such a positive light. So you would expect Jesus coming to Jerusalem. It's been this thing that's predicted. He's going to come. He's going to wield Jerusalem like a sword. You know, there's going to be praising of his name, you know, from sea to sea, all around the world. It's all starting in Jerusalem. Rejoice, Jerusalem, rise up, Zion, all the rest of it. And Jesus comes, and the first thing that happens in Jerusalem is he weeps. He weeps over the city. He weeps over what there is and what's to come. And so this is an account that's only in Luke as well. I haven't sort of compared Jesus's entry into other cities, not into other cities, in other gospel accounts, but this particular passage only appears in Luke, talking about Jesus weeping over the city. So why is it here? Well, it shows God's heart. A lot of the time we see Jesus as being sort of, well, obviously Jesus is God. He is one of the Trinity, and so by looking at Jesus we can see what God's heart is as well. And so with all those things in mind, let's read it again and see what Jesus is saying. It says, "And when he drew near and saw the city, he wept over it, saying, 'Would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes.'" So what's hidden from these people's eyes? What are the things that would make for peace? And who is the you even? So the you is the people who don't recognize Jesus, who don't see who he is and what his purpose is, and haven't turned to him and aren't following him. Those are the you. You, even you. So the you is these people who don't recognize him. The even you is specifying those people in Jerusalem. So he's saying, would that you, the people who don't know me, but even you, the people who are in David's city, you know, my ancestors' city, because Jesus is a descendant of the king who sort of, this is known as David's city. This is the city of the Jewish people. Even the people in Jerusalem, there are people who don't recognize Jesus. even you had known on this day the things that make for peace. So he's saying this day right now, in this moment, as I'm entering your city, you don't know the things that I'm going to do, the work that I'm going to perform, my death, my resurrection, the tearing of the curtain in the temple, all things we'll get to. These people don't know what's going to happen. They don't understand. Now they're hidden from your eyes. Just like whenever Jesus has prophesied his death before, it's been hidden from his disciples' eyes. These things are hidden from these people's eyes, but it's to a greater degree. It's to a degree where they don't even acknowledge Jesus. They don't even turn to Jesus and follow him. They don't sort of have this faith without sight where they follow him. They don't have that. They don't have the sight and they don't have the faith. And so he says, for the days will come upon you where your enemies will set up a barricade around you and surround you and hem you in on every side and tear you down to the ground, you and your children within you. And they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you did not know the time of your visitation. So the visitation is Jesus. It's him coming. It's him walking into this city as prophesied. But a lot of the city doesn't recognise it. A lot of the people don't recognise it. And that's very much a passage that exists within this moment in time, but also a passage that has been extended out throughout history. People still don't recognise Jesus. People still don't see his action. People still don't know the work that he's doing. And so while he's addressing this specifically to Jerusalem, it has echoes throughout history, where it's generation after generation of people who don't see Jesus and don't recognise them. And so what does he say is going to happen to these people? Well, there are consequences for things. God is very clear on that. The Bible is very clear on that. There are consequences for things. And rejecting God, turning away from God, has the heaviest consequences of all of them. And so we see that in the days will come upon you when your enemies will set up a barricade around you and surround you and hem you in on every side. So historians think that this is in reference to the Romans. The Romans constructed earthworks around Jerusalem. And there was a siege that happened as well. They sort of sieged the whole city. And that is true. I do believe that. I do accept that. But you look at that region, and even today, it's a region that's still marred with conflict, that's still being torn between different groups, that's still being ripped up by violence, still under siege, essentially. It hasn't been an area of peace very much at all since Jesus was there. And so this is an area that has since had all these afflictions on it, since had all these difficulties. And Jesus is saying, look, you don't see what I've come here to do. You don't understand. For the days will come upon you when all of these difficulties will arise, all of these terrible things will happen. And that's a really hard thing to hear. But at the same time, the Bible tells us frequently, all the time, if you turn to God, he will protect you in times like this. He will walk with you through the darkest valleys. He will stand by you in these difficult times. And so, difficulties are going to come. Enemies are going to surround you. These horrible things are going to happen, but you can still turn to God. You still have time. We're still in that period before Jesus' return, where there's still an opportunity to change things. And he says, they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you did not know the time of your visitation. Jesus is saying, look, the consequence for these people not recognizing me is severe. But when you think about it in a broad perspective, is God walking among people? Is God come down to earth, walking here into Jerusalem, and they don't accept him? They don't recognize him. They don't see him. So of course there'd be consequences for that. He's God, he's God walking among people, and they nail him to a cross and put him outside their city and don't acknowledge him and don't welcome him in. But the beautiful thing is, even through that, even though we've all been that person at some point in our life, there is still forgiveness offered to us. There is still acceptance and love offered to us. God still wants relationship with us, even through all of that. And Jesus weeps. That's the biggest thing about this passage as well. Jesus weeps. He isn't saying these things out of anger. He isn't saying these things, oh, I hate you guys, you suck, you don't acknowledge me, you don't recognize me. He's weeping as he says this stuff. He's so sad. It breaks his heart because he loves the people here and he wants relationship with them and he wants community with them. And you can still have that. even though you may feel like you're still in one of these ripples in history where you're not welcoming Jesus and you're not accepting him, you can still come to him, you can still acknowledge him, and you can still find relationship with him. And so that's how Jesus enters the city. And we'll read the next little bit quickly as well, because it tells us the first thing that Jesus does, the first action that he does after this, is he goes to the temple. Now, the temple in Jerusalem was very important. It was constructed hundreds of years ago. It was the house of God. It was this really, really important thing, because if you think of Jerusalem as the city of the Jewish people, then the temple in Jerusalem is going to be the temple. It's massively important. There's tons of history around it that we can go into another time, but for now, just think of it, how important this temple is. And so Jesus enters it, and he began to drive out those who sold, saying to them, "It is written, my house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers." So Jesus comes into the city, he walks into the temple, and what does he find? He finds the temple is full of merchants. It's full of people selling things. It isn't a house of prayer. It isn't somewhere where people can come and have a relationship with God, come and have time with God. It's people who are making money, who are exploiting this landmark for their own selfish gain, for their own greed. And so Jesus drives these people out. It doesn't go into the details here about Jesus flipping tables and all the rest of it, but that happens in other accounts in the Bible. But here it talks about Jesus driving these people out. He drives out, the first thing he does when he goes into Jerusalem, he goes straight to the house of prayer and he drives out the evil in it. And that's something that we can see in our own hearts as well when we welcome Jesus in. The first thing he does, he goes straight to our prayer life and he drives out the things that get in the way. And he has relationship with us and he has time with us in that. It's this, a lot of the time you have to drive things out before you can put something good in place, because you can't have a temple and keep the merchants there in the corner. You've got to take all the merchants out before you can return it to a house of prayer. And so Jesus does this, and then he moves on to often the second thing you find when Jesus comes into your life, which is he teaches. You learn things. So it starts with this prayer, it starts with this relationship, this intimacy with Jesus, and from that teaching comes and wisdom and knowledge. And so Jesus begins to teach in the temple, verse 46, and he was teaching daily in the temple. The chief priests and the scribes and the principal men of the people were seeking to destroy him, but they did not find anything they could do, for all the people were hanging on his words. All of the people were completely enraptured by him. All of the people were completely transfixed by the things that Jesus was saying, because he was speaking the truth. He'd driven out the merchants and he was speaking the truth into this place. And so you see Jesus coming really powerfully into Jerusalem, goes straight into the temple, drives these merchants out, begins teaching daily, begins praying daily, and all these people gather, and yet Jesus still has wept over the city because there are people who won't come to him and there are people who won't believe him. And so, yeah, that's a challenge to us. How can we be driving people? Not people out, that sounds like the opposite of what we're trying to do. How can we be welcoming people in and driving darkness out of places? How can we be driving darkness out and inviting people into the kingdom, so that they're not left on the outside? They're not the ones who Jesus wept over as he entered Jerusalem. Big questions. But yeah, I'll leave that in your court. For now, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye bye.